Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com, the #1 listener-supported talk radio station, throwing ourselves upon the gears of the machine. Revolution Radio, where information never sleeps.
You called down the thunder, well now you got it. Right, you tell them I'm coming, and hell's coming with me, you hear? Hell's coming with me!
Revolution Radio.
The Russian glen, one of their hunting, the fear of little men. You see, nobody ever goes in. Nobody ever comes out.
We know where you are at all times. That's our business.
All right, welcome to Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, where you don't need to expect us. We're already here. And now it is time for Firing Lines with Douglas Dietrich. So call in 347-688-2902. That is 347-688-2902 and discuss what you would like to discuss with Mr. Douglas Dietrich. freedomslips.com, Revolution Radio, weaponized talk radio.
Okay, we're here for the Saturday Night Firing Lines with two callers already in the queue. One of them is our lovely Amanda Youth. The other is Mr. Peter Moon, and we're taking them for tonight, and they'll carry us through, at the very least, the opening hour. Want to give a shout-out, of course, to my lovely Executrix producer, Laura Lee Solomon, and a shout-out to our co-producer halfway across the Pacific in the United States-occupied Kingdom of Atui, as it's known in the Polynesian language, otherwise known as the state of Hawaii. And Judith Agert, our Volcano Crown correspondent over there, reports in as to the quality of sound during our broadcast and lets us know how the bandwidth is transmitting. So she plays a very vital role, and I want to give a shout out as well to other people who play a very vital role, one of them being, of course, James Reed Garrett, a man who's provided some support this month for us, and both morally and fiscally. So we want to say thank you to James Reed Garrett, wonderful human being. Shout out as well to all of our normal fans, Carrie Sekviar, and of course we have other friends like Danny Trashboat Crab, and I want everyone who has ordered our DVDs to know that they are en route. Thank you, of course, for Judith giving us the all clear, and we will, of course, move on to our callers right now. As a matter of fact, I want to bring up Amanda Uten. I hope that the dear lady can give us a bit of a debriefing on how she's doing at the moment, and then she can kind of lurk quietly at her convenience. And how are you, Amanda? What's going on right now?
Hello. I'm doing all right. Mm-hmm. My foot's getting better, and I am still waiting for paperwork and working on paperwork for my insurance issue. So nothing too new to report.
Okay, and I want to remind everyone, of course, that we will be putting up a post probably shortly after tonight's program on a course of action in Facebook for writing the insurance company, our good friend James Kimbraw, who has written, of course, the other individual who was involved with the insurance processing is now going to try and contact Mary Renouf. Her surname is spelled Renouf. And she is on Facebook, and people are encouraged to contact her by her private messages there. We'll bring up a bit more of the details during the promotionals, just to remind people of that situation. In the meantime, I'm very glad that you seem to be as stable as can be during the current situation, and I want people to maintain Amanda Ute in their thoughts and prayers and their awareness, and hopefully this has done a lot to alleviate a kind of dark cloud or atmosphere of brooding stalking that has surrounded your acreage for quite some time. Has that been the case?
It has, yeah.
Yeah, wonderful. Now, I do want to address a question that was relayed to myself through our Volcano Crown Pacific correspondent, Judith Ager, from various people who have looked at my artwork presenting yourself or representing yourself. And some people were asking why I gave such a greenish tinge to your lovely blonde hair. And I do hope that you yourself read the message or the context behind that. It's because of the bamboo, people. It's the bamboo, people. She does represent the growth of these bamboo stalks. Tell us a bit about Pacific West Bamboo before I turn towards our good friend Peter Moon.
Sure. I import and do work with mainly Central and South America right now, and help subsistence farmers with bringing bamboo products around. We import whole and crushed panel bamboo. And locally here in Oregon, I have my own bamboo nursery. So I also sell and grow live bamboo.
Now, people can contact you where and how?
PacificWestBamboo.com. You can also look me up on Facebook. Just put in Pacific West Bamboo in the search. And you can also call the business number at 503-839-8126.
Wonderful. Could you repeat that?
Ooh, sorry. Yes, sure. 503-839-8126.
Was that one of the kitties attacking you?
Yes,
right now?
I'm sorry. She was jumping on the mouse.
Of course. That goes without saying. That's
right.
By the way, I want to give a shout out. Stay with us for just a moment, man. I want to give a shout out to John Miranda, our good friend over in Sweden. Father's Day is the morrow. We're going to talk a bit about that in the second hour. I want to, of course, bear in mind for everyone that it's a solemn day for myself. I have much commemoration and, shall we say, communion to conduct in the next few hours after this transmission with my own late and sainted father, George Joseph Henry Dietrich, who was a veteran of no less than 3 acknowledged wars: the Second World War, the Korean Peninsular Conflict, and the Second Indochine Conflict, or the Vietnam War, as it's popularly referenced. And, of course, he was in the China campaign under the theater command of the Americans and their insurgency of China in the 1930s, prior to Pearl Harbor and the Second World War going into formally declared hostilities. But obviously the Americans were very much engaged in aggression in China, which the Japanese were interdicting prior to the Second World War entering Pacific phase of proactive prosecution of hostilities. So in Peter Moon's case, of course, he has 2 lovely sons. Hopefully he gets an opportunity to see them. Of course, Father's Day is on a different day in many developed nations across the world. So we'll appreciate a shout in from him at some point in time. Peter Moon is also a father. He doesn't have any sons, of course. So in China, he would be looked on as most unfortunate within the Chinese culture. But we'll bring him on a bit in a few minutes to speak about that. Amanda Ute, of course, has a father who has come by to check in with the kids today. And so that's a relief. Hopefully that relieves some of her burden. And of course, one of the things that Peter Moon said one time when he was on air with me, which I disagreed with quite heartily, but there was no time to really pursue it in any detail, was we were speaking about Venezuela, and I was speaking about the entire Latin American hemisphere, dividing into 2 camps, that which was open for trade and that which was, in a sense, closed for business. And this is very much an east-west division. It is pretty much all the way along the line of the Andes that this division has taken place. And those nations that are facing the Pacific are very much open for business, whereas those, inclusive of Brazil, that are facing the Atlantic are very closed and trying to maintain some level of autonomy from what they feel is American-dominated world trade. Now, because of this, the subject of Venezuela came up, and our good friend John Miranda was poo-pooing what I had stated about the United Nations and their World Misery Index. Now, I did say John Miranda, did I not? And what happened was that he was basically saying that that was a place he would gladly retire to or move to, which I found sound just appalling, considering the fact that everything I see coming out of there, and it can't all be capitalist propaganda financed from Washington, D.C. Some of this comes from very anarchist-oriented media outlets, has been that the place itself is in a state of anarchy in the most negative sense, as opposed to the ideological anarcho-syndicalist sense. It's entering a state of chaos. So, Amanda, what do the people you trade with in bamboo, what can they tell us about Venezuela and the Caribbean? Tell us a bit about that before I bring on Peter.
Just that I haven't gotten into it too much with them, just that they made it clear, stay clear of Venezuela, and that they didn't want to have any to-doings with them right now. Nothing against the people, nothing against what's going on, but just that it's pretty chaotic, and that they just didn't want anything to do with that country right now, trying to do any business. It's very hard. And there's a lot of mixed messages. And my guy right now is in Germany. We're working on a new sealer for bamboo flooring. And so I'm hoping to get a little bit more detail when he comes back from Germany, and I'll be able to have time to talk with him more about what in Colombia and Costa Rica they kind of see.
Well, isn't Venezuela pretty much a no-go? They've been pretty blatant.
It is. They just say no-go, like it's just flat out nope, just no. Everybody just nobody wants to touch it right now. It's a big mess.
Yes, thank you. And so I want the two of you to speak together for a moment. Peter Moon has a bamboo question. He wants to ask you about bamboo. And you have a little bit to say about magic to Peter, because he was talking about the Magical Child bookstore. As a matter of fact, I'm going to review exactly what he said about Magical Child bookstore before the two of you speak, because I think that that's very important. Magical Child, of course, was a bookstore that was located in New York City. And Peter Moon used to work in New York City, and he was basically, I think, across the street in a computer company on 19th Street, and so he was able to visit it, and he'll give us some of the details about that when he comes on. But so if you have anything to say about magic that you might want to relate to Peter in terms of an anecdote that you think might be helpful to tonight's theme of what we're going to break into in this opening hour, go ahead and do so. But meanwhile, Mr. Moon, please meet Made Mute, and thank you very much for coming on with us, and feel free to ask your bamboo question to get things started.
Okay, hi Amanda.
Hello, nice to meet you.
Yes, I've heard you talk the last couple of weeks, and I've heard you talk once before, but I wanted to, one of the most I guess, detrimental things to having bamboo plants is that they can spread all over the place. And I once tried to buy some, and the man wouldn't sell me any bamboo because he says, you know, your property's not big enough. And I said, well, with all the grafting and biology that they've done, don't they have something as non-spreading bamboo? And he kind of looked sheepish and embarrassed, like I you know, he wasn't going to tell me about it. Is there such a thing as non-spreading bamboo?
Oh, absolutely. There's many clumping varieties.
All right.
That they won't spread. They'll just grow up and slightly out. But you can also very easily train bamboo, and it can take over. It can be invasive, but just like other plants, you know, anything can get overgrown and take over. And it actually is a plant that has memory. So if every time there's a shoot that pops up out of your ground that you don't want in an area, just clip it, cut it, chop it right in the beginning, and you keep repeating that, it will learn that it is not a place where it can grow, and it will go find new routes of where it can send up its shoots.
Well, thank you. I've learned something, and bamboo is one of the most beautiful plants that's around. That's why.
Absolutely. If you would, I'm not sure where you're located, but if you let me know where you're at, I can send you a list of clumping varieties that do well in your area.
Long Island.
Long Island. Okay, sure. Easy. I can send that through Douglas or Laura Lee if you'd like.
Yeah. Okay, I appreciate that. And now the audience has been educated a little bit more. And I think it's something that, you know, should continue, little 2-minute commercials here and there. I think it's good.
I agree. And Peter Moon, the both of you hopefully will become friended on Facebook and also exchange things more directly. There's no need to go through us as middlemen. Now, Amanda, you don't mind the green tinge that I provide to your hair to emphasize your bamboo background, do you?
Oh, no, I have green eyes, and green's a fave color, so No.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. You had never brought it up, but always, of course, anyone who feels I'm misrepresenting them in such a way that they feel uncomfortable with it, they're always welcome, of course, to inform myself. So, honey, go ahead and kind of just sit back, and whenever you want to come on or feel a need to come on, go ahead and make yourself available. Was there something magical that you wanted to bring up as an anecdote for Peter Moon, or should I just bring him on and we can start cutting loose with what was going on with Magical Child, the bookstore?
Let's just bring them on, and I definitely have some questions for the future sometime. But also, happy Father's Day to everybody out there. And no, I'd like to just get going, and I'm sure I'll have more questions for the future.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Peter, let's go a bit into introducing exactly why the Magical Child Bookstore was so important. Basically, I was working, of course, with Michael Aquino under orders with the Department of Defense, and he explained to myself the origins of Peter Levinda's Simon Necronomicon. Now, Peter Levinda has been proven irrevocably, irrefutably, incontrovertibly to be the author of the quote-unquote Simon Necronomicon by both Brandon Young and myself.
And the Copyright Office of the United States of America.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. And I'll have you go deeper into that.
As deeper I can go, but it's a fact of copyright.
Thank you so much, and very much appreciated. And of course, Brandon Young, of course, almost paid for his investigations of Peter Levinda with his life. Both Brandon Young and Amanda Ute will be on with us this Topical Tuesday to speak deeper into their mutual experiences with Burning Man. It was not possible to do that the last Topical Tuesday on critical omissions because of the wild weather that was ongoing in the Pacific Northwest. Of course, there's always kind of a metaphysical element to that. I remember I had Noreen Helpan on as a guest of mine a long time ago, before many of you listeners out there were listening or following myself. And in terms of Noreen Helpan, she is a member of the Soka Gakkai. Soka Gakkai is a very controversial new religious movement in Japan that, of course, has established itself to an extent in the United States. And Japan has many controversies that they don't like to leak out to the outside world. So when she was on with myself, we faced an enormous amount of technical difficulties that have made what you've heard or experienced with ourselves in the recent past look like nothing. It was unbelievable. It was as if the jinn themselves had gotten into the cyber system and were jacking it. And she, of course, was of the opinion that whenever something positive, as she views Soka Gakkai, is being disseminated, that negative forces or entities intervene, deconstructive or entropic influences that try to present obstacles or obstructions. And I can certainly accept that to an extent. I also believe that simply there were Japanese government agents, and they have their own version of what China has with internet censorship, though not nearly state-sponsored to the extent that it happens in China, but they do have it in the intelligence sense to interfere with information about Japan essentially leaking to the outside world that they find controversial. And that might very well have been taking place because it never happened with any other program at that extensive or effective a level. It was literally a cyber attack. It was probably Japanese agents. And in the case of Amanda Ute and your weather, it might have been very much a metaphysical thing. I find it very coincident, almost to the point of the supernal or the infernal, that you had weather that prevented yourself from communicating what needed to be communicated with Brandon Young last Tuesday. This Tuesday, we'll speak more about it. And what people will be impressed with when they hear the both of you interacting on air will be the similarities of your assassination attempts. And we will get into that, of course, on Tuesday. Both of you, Brandon Young and yourself, make certain you survive until then, quite seriously. And in terms of Peter Moon, basically what Michael Aquino was able to tell me about these infernal influences was in terms of Peter Levenda and his manufacturing of the Simon Necronomicon. It all started one night at the Herman Slater's occult shop / publishing house, Magical Child, in the heyday of the occult renaissance of the 1960s and 70s, when everybody was a witch or a warlock, getting into black magic. Vajahuduns, or voodoo, was all the rage. And we had one of the first presentations of that through the James Bond films. And again, it's a credit to Ian Fleming. He was one of the first people to introduce the concept, long before Bruce Lee, as a matter of fact, to the Western world of martial arts through his fictional character of Oddjob. Now, this was all done in his paperback publications long before they entered the field of cinematography. And before film popularized the martial arts, it was introduced to the West as a discipline to the popular, shall we say, body politic through James Bond novels. The other thing that he also introduced to the West was the concept, more popularly understood than it ever was before, of voodoo and its connection with the occult and espionage, and the fact that it was a large part of the underworld empire of criminal activity throughout the Caribbean. Now, during this period of time, you had people like Herman Slater, who was an active homosexual, well known in the San Francisco community. And of course, he had a gay lover named Ed Buczynski, whose surname I was trying to spell out the last time I was on air. And that was Buczynski. And Buczynski was someone who, along with himself, ran the store with a lot of alcohol to fuel it, because they had a lot of orgies that took place there. And it was located at 400 Henry Street in Brooklyn. And one time, when there was a big beer and wine bash, the party took a turn when people started talking about the nearby Unitarian Church. Many of the people there were members of the Warlock Shop / Magical Child crew. And many of the partygoers, it turned out, were H.P. Lovecraft fans. And it was brought up during the party that he had once lived in an apartment just up the block from where they were. And that's when Peter Levenda, who was involved with these homosexual orgies, apparently quite aggressively and actively, digging into the local fresh meat that was brought into the shop, he became entranced and ultimately contacted Aquino for permission to follow up on a project that they decided they were going to do at this particular, go down. Once they were all into a big body pile, they came up with the idea of producing a graduation textbook. And as a graduation textbook, what they wanted to produce was a fake magical book that would include ideas from the Golden Dawn, maybe Leyland's Aradia, the Egyptian Book of the Dead, some of the works of Samuel Noah Kramer on ancient Mesopotamia, and they wanted it booby-trapped. The whole idea was to create a magical booby trap, and they took some inspiration of that from the Book of the Sacred Magic of Abramelin the Mage. And now, when this was still in its embryonic stage, they wanted to make it so that anyone with a basic background would clearly see that the rights and the material were rigged to self-destruct and might even flash back on the user. So this was meant for people who were not stupid but highly educated magicians. And in terms of the backfiring, if you have any magical training, and this is magic with a K, differentiating it from stage magic or prestidigitation or sleight of hand, if you had any common sense, as a matter of fact, when you look at the Necronomicon, you'll see that protections which a ceremonial magician might use are entirely lacking. When they're presented, they're very incomplete. And in addition, the material itself, since it's such a wild mixture of cultures and practices, there's no coherent internal unity. The result is that anybody using the book would open themselves up to forces which cannot be handled. Even if you just interpret them as parts of the unconscious or archetype, you would be releasing that on yourself, those elements of your own empowerment, your own persona that would destroy you. Very similar to creating a case of schizophrenia. So the original aim that Lavinda got together and presented to Aquino, who gave him the go-ahead to produce it, was to deliberately fill it with mistakes and pitfalls and give it to neophytes to read in order to see if they could recognize the errors in the text in order to evaluate their level of magical knowledge. If they could pass the Necronomicon test, they were presumably judged to have advanced beyond the stage of total ignorance and entered a state where they could become a Harry Potter for the dark side, so to speak. So that was the entire purpose of that book. And then what happened was that Aquino gave the order to Peter Lavinda to unleash it on the world. And that, of course, has resulted in an uncounted number of deaths. We're talking literally in the thousands of children who pry this off the shelf. And it is, of course, connected to many satanic murders. And all of this is hidden for all the reasons I articulated in my last transmission, because the police will not factor in occult crime. Occult crime is dismissed as if they would find, say, for instance, within a serial killer's apartment, if they found a statue of the Virgin Mary or a portrait of the Black Madonna, they would not implicate the Roman Catholic Church or the Polish community. Instead, of course, they would dismiss those elements within that person's home as non-extant. They would not be included as evidence because they would not say that there was a Catholic religious crusade for serial killing. Now, so too do they dismiss all of the evidence of satanic trimmings. And for this reason, you have people like E.A. Koetting, Koetting is his surname, Koetting, and E.A. Koetting was a guest on a Revolution Radio Hostesses program recently, Christine Joanna Hartz, and he basically said that he owed all of his success to the Necronomicon of quote-unquote Peter Lavinda, quote-unquote Simon, who is, of course, Peter Lavinda. And E.A. Koetting is saying that because his entire purpose in his work for Aquino and Lavinda is to promote the further chaos and suffering and misery generated by the egregore of this work, so that they bring in the age of the anti-gods, the entropic entities who feed off all of this chaos. This is what your U.S. military wants around the world. And, of course, your United States military is Satan's own army, except it's beyond and beneath. Very important to emphasize, we're not dealing with daemons anymore. Daemons, of course, feed off human suffering in a parasitic sense, but for that very reason, they do not kill the host. They would not want the annihilation of the world because it would mean the annihilation of themselves. We are speaking of something that is extrastellar, extra-cosmic, beyond and beneath diabolic. It is out of this universe, not just out of this world, but out of this universe, and something that seeks to destroy the creation of the divinity himself, and all of the rebel angels are the fallen angels that are within that creation as much as the creation of the divinity himself. So with that, Peter Moon, we're going to bring you in to talk about Magical Child and your experiences there. I'm going to presume that you weren't involved in any of these homosexual orgies, and perhaps you can clarify myself if I'm mistaken on that.
Yeah, well, correct. I was not involved in any such thing. And I want to start by saying that actually somebody sent me a copy of the Necronomicon once. They were in Supermax. Assumably they had committed a murder. That's why they would be there. They were a reader of mine. And I'm not sure why or how, and I think I still have the book. What I did is I took it and I immersed it in salt and put it in a specific location in my garage. It's still there as far as I know, immersed in salt.
Incredible. Thank you. I appreciate that. And that's now, and they sent this to you essentially as, now, obviously you're a man of the world. You get about, you could buy this off any shelf for less than $5. Why would they send that to you? That must be why you treated it with such suspicion. By the way, for our listeners, Supermax means super maximum security prison, meaning something similar to death row. So an individual on death row took their time, which takes a lot of energy energy and in prison and a lot of effort to get something sent to somebody else. They have to go through security procedures to do that. So somebody really went out of their way to send something to Peter Moon that he could easily have purchased at his own convenience anytime he wanted. This is why Peter Moon treated it so seriously. Is that the case, Peter?
Well, I used to get quite a bit of letters from this person. It was a lady, and they were always friendly letters. But I for some reason, she thought maybe that I would be interested in this book. I don't know. This is sort of probably was done through the ether, but as opposed to a, super volitional negative act on her part. I don't know why I put it in Salt. I don't remember. I might have been advised to, but certainly I was aware of the book. And there are some other interesting things in and around this sort of where you've been like immersed in this whole Peter Levenda saga, as has Brandon, who I also know. And yeah, so I'm not as familiar with it all as you, but I will say this: Henry Street was where the Magical Child, formerly known, I think, as the Warlock Shop, used to be. But I never. By the way, that location is not far from where I will often go to lunch when I'm in the neighborhood to the Hare Krishna Temple. They have a very good lunch there, vegetarian lunch. But it's not far from an area where Aleister Crowley used to attend the New Montauk Theater in about 1910, where his priestess, Eva Tanguay, would perform the Dance of the Seven Veils or whatever she would perform. It was not far from a place that Crowley used to frequent, within a mile or so. But anyway, I only went to the Magical Child bookstore when it moved to Manhattan. And by coincidence, I worked a couple blocks south on 17th Street in the Chelsea district. And I wasn't really aware of the Magical Child per se, because you can walk up and down streets in Manhattan and the side streets you don't even notice unless you happen to go down that way. So I discovered it after our company moved. And then after I went to the Magical Child bookstore several times, because I had gotten interested in the subject of magic as a result of having read the book L. Ron Hubbard, Madman or Messiah by Bette Corydon and L. Ron Hubbard Jr. And I saw that Hubbard, who I had known personally and worked with, I saw that his interest in magic was far deeper than I had realized. So I wanted to study. If he knew so much about magic, I wanted to study what he had known. And of course, I would go in there and I saw Herman. Herman was a very strange character. And the store, the thing that struck me most about the store, they kind of had this mask that, some sort of demon mask that would have water flowing through its mouth. It made you feel like you were walking into a gargoyle shop or something. And then it was, I suppose it was spooky. It would certainly freak out a fundamentalist Christian, with a lot of herbs on the wall, a tremendous amount of herbs and jars. And you really got the idea that people were using spells, casting spells with those herbs. I'm sure some people used them for just health reasons. There was always a reader there in the back who would be doing tarot readings. And there was a very interesting selection of books. Only one section was on what you might call hardcore Satanism. There were other subjects that were usually much more deeper than you would find in your typical New Age bookstore. And I would go there looking for certain materials. It's where I did purchase a book, The Secrets of Aleister Crowley by Amato Crowley, who I had a long correspondence with. He was a bastard son of Aleister Crowley. And he was somebody that really upset the OTO, being the Ordo Templi Orientis, Aleister Crowley's magical order. So, and they had this...
And how did he upset them?
Well, they did not recognize him as being a son of Crowley. And they are very, I guess, officious and imperious in their administrative recognition. Like they think that they are, can declare edicts and this sort of thing. They're very imperious.
So they're very much like the Temple of Set. And that brings us to a question before you go on about the bookstore itself. Jack Whiteside Parsons, who, of course, was the individual who organized Jack Parsons Laboratory, which became, of course, JPL, or Jet Propulsion Laboratories, when it was essentially absorbed by NASA, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, after his assassination.
I think it's the other way around. I think NASA was absorbed by JPL.
Thank you very much. I mean, there's very much that element of truth. And so tell us about Jack. He had some kind of sodomy ceremony with L. Ron Hubbard, apparently, I believe. I got the impression that Jack was on top and Ron Hubbard was left permanently psychologically scarred by that, or at least for a very long time of his life. I got this impression from Aquino's ramblings at various periods of times on these two characters. Is there anything you can bring up about that?
I suggested that to you one time, I think, and you said that was the best explanation you'd ever heard. And the reason, I don't know this for a fact, but if you read the Babylon Working, or the Book of Babylon, as it's called, that Jack wrote, and it's available online, you will see that during the Babylon Working, he went out to the Mojave Desert with Ron. And there's this famous thing, he says, "It is done." Now, what he did in the Mojave, he didn't just drive out there, look at a sand dune and say, "It is done." There was some form of working, some form of Enochian calls. And if you understand magic, and especially Crowleyan magic, and that Crowley had his degrees of magic, and the highest degree, there's many higher degrees than this, but if you read the blah blah on it, the ninth degree is sexual magic with a female to incarnate a moon child. That's the purpose of the ninth degree. Mm-hmm. And then the 10th degree is when you change your identity, you become like Batman, Bruce Wayne becomes Batman, or Clark Kent becomes Superman, and you literally change your identity. Now the 10th degree is called an administrative title. So it's kind of a vague reference, the 10th degree, but you actually are kind of abdicating your identity and going on to being or doing something else, which is certainly a pattern that Jack carried out in his own life. But the 11th degree was homosexual magic, which was Crowley's own flavor. And of course, it made him very controversial, and it can be viewed in a lot of different ways, one of which is complete and utter perversity and reversal of anything that might be considered godly in a Christian sense. Now, I'm not casting any judgments on this. I'm just saying that this
understood. In other words, you're not saying this in order to horrify people and to create a Christian reactionary response of condemnation.
No, it's not positive or negative. I'm just saying this is the way Crowley thought. And Jack was a deep adherent of Aleister Crowley. He really thought very highly of Crowley, and more importantly, of Crowley's work, and even more importantly, magical work.
Right. Now, and Jack, of course, was someone who Crowley put in charge of the American branch of the OTO, if I'm not mistaken, certainly out in the Southwest. And he was also in charge of what was known as the Agape Lodge, something of that nature, which was
the titular head, because they had to replace Wilfred Talbot Smith. And it's important to mention that Wilfred Talbot Smith had the same middle name as Edward Talbot Kelly, but also the last name of Larry Talbot in the Wolfman movie.
Right, right. That's important. Now, which influenced the other?
Well, that's a good question. But Crowley, what he did is he retired Smith. He kind of bumped him upstairs because he wasn't happy with what Smith was doing. I'm not sure exactly why, but he replaced him with an acting head, which was Parsons. He eventually wanted to replace Parsons because Parsons was becoming too rogue.
Yes.
And too rogue and out of control, which is how Jack was. But what I'm saying is about his relation with Hubbard. He welcomed Hubbard into the home. Now, this gets very complicated with Hubbard because Hubbard, before he was living with Parsons, he was living on Lookout Mountain with Robert Heinlein.
Yes.
And Heinlein is the one who brought Hubbard to a science fiction meeting. They would have their weekly or monthly meetings in Los Angeles, and Jack would attend these. And of course, Hubbard and Heinlein were both science fiction authors. And there's a story I once read where Ray Bradbury is running around with a Halloween costume. He's a young guy because he grew up in Los Angeles, passing out flyers or something at one of these meetings. It was probably that very same meeting. But in any case, that's how Hubbard met Jack. But Hubbard had always said, and it was always believed to be a PR line, that he was sent in by naval intelligence and to basically bust up the Jack Parsons Lodge. Well, Heinlein would be the go-to person involved in naval intelligence, as was Hubbard. But there's also, which you have told me, and I can find at least one other source to show that Hubbard had British connections. I think the guy's name was Ian McBean, who worked for British intelligence and probably recruited Hubbard when he was in China as a young boy.
Right. Now, correct me if I'm wrong on this, but if I remember from my Presidio Documents Destruction days, if I remember correctly, L. Ron Hubbard was on Navy leave in April of 1945. We're talking about World War II was still an active phase of prosecution when Jack Parsons had basically got in charge of the OTO. He suddenly was, I think he pretty much, as a matter of fact, at the beginning of the war, around 1941, replaced the father of not just American rocketry, but rocketry all over the modern world, Robert Goddard. And right. Robert Goddard, of course, was the man who had developed the liquid fuel rockets. He was the man who was launching them out of Roswell, New Mexico. And then he got bumped out by this young son of a bitch, this young punk, because this guy developed at MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, the solid jet fuel propulsion system. But that isn't what made Jack Parsons get the attention of the military, because keep in mind, people, Robert Goddard had developed rocketry, which was being taken seriously by the Germans as a weapon. And the Germans, of course, began developing rocketry as a weapon because they were under the Versailles Diktat, or the limits, the Arms Limitations Treaty of Versailles. As a result, they could not develop massive artillery guns legally until the Versailles shackles were overthrown. And once those paper shackles were overthrown, we had big guns for the Reich. But until then, they developed the only artillery that they could, which was rocket artillery. That was not covered by the Versailles Diktat because it was not conceived of. It was conceived of during the American Revolutionary War, the Napoleonic Wars, but nobody thought of using it on the intercontinental level until the Germans decided to go in that direction. Now, all of this American intelligence was more than aware of, and yet they would never finance Robert Goddard. And Robert Goddard was saying, look at what the Germans are doing. Look at what they're doing with my development. Don't we need this for defense? And the Americans told him to go F himself. Go play with your rockets in Roswell. We don't care. You can rot in hell. But what brought the attention to them was not Jack Parsons' technical developments, but his Satanism. That's what got him all the fat and juicy security contracts. That's what got him ultimately what became, the Jack Parsons who got the crater, appropriately enough, on the dark side of the moon, named after him. Now, please tell us a bit about that in Von Karman, if you would.
Well, yes. You see, the missing puzzle here with the contracts and whatnot would have to be, see, there were four people, and there's actually a fifth that formed JPL. It was Ed Foreman, the mechanic, who was a friend of Jack Parsons, who had actually protected him when he was getting bullied as a young man, and they became lifelong friends. So Jack was the sort of the mechanic, literally the engine mechanic. Jack was the powder scientist. Literally, he was good at explosives. He had testified in a famous trial in Los Angeles, convicting somebody who may have actually been the one who blew him up when he got out of jail. And then there was Frank Molina, who was the professor. He was the mathematician. And the fourth one is Theodore von Karman, but there was a fifth one, and I apologize for not remembering his name. He was Chinese, and he was his part was underplayed, and he brought rocketry back to China after in later years. So I apologize for not remembering the Chinese man's name. But,
understood. We'll find that out later, but that's fascinating.
Yes, but Theodore von Karman, now he was the leading professor at Caltech. That they basically Foreman and Parsons were doing explosives in the Arroyo Seco Canyon of Pasadena, and they came to von Karman, and he was brought to them. Molina might have, I don't know how Molina got involved. I don't remember the story, but von Karman was like the older, mature guy who was a professor at Caltech, and he was the guy who could make all the political connections happen. And so it was those four who are recognized as the founders of Jet Propulsion Laboratory, or Jack Parsons Laboratory, as it is still called on the campus to this day. But Theodore von Karman, now, when you can read a book by him, a biography, the most interesting part of which, it's kind of benign, a lot of yap, but he does talk about having a very strange operation where it was a hernia operation, that the same one Einstein had. They were both given this hernia operation by this Nazi doctor that kind of really screwed them both up. And one of my magical friends told me that she says, yeah, they were going after their sperm. They wanted the sperm of these two great scientists. But von Karman had a reputation, like, after he would appear in all these countries, then the war would start, because he was the father of aeronautics. But there's another side to von Karman, and I discovered it when I was looking him up, studying him many years ago, and I would see his picture popping up with Jane Mansfield, once in Ireland and once in Greece. You can find one if you do a Google image search of he'll pop up with Jane Mansfield. Now, of course, Jane Mansfield was a famous movie star who was actually more outrageous and sexual than Marilyn Monroe, and was a competitor to Marilyn Monroe.
Yes, and it's very important to emphasize, and the general public can vet this themselves, that she was a physical intimate, a lover of Anton Szandor LaVey, the founder of the First Church of Satan in San Francisco. It was ultimately her liaison with him that led to her death. She was beheaded by a plate of glass that fell off of a truck that was in front of her while she was in a moving car with her boyfriend. They were behind the truck, which was uphill, and San Francisco is loaded with hills, and the pane of glass was not affixed correctly, and it just flew off and literally beheaded her within a moment.
I don't think it was in San Francisco. I think.
Oh, it wasn't. It was, where was it? It was Los Angeles.
In the South.
In the South. Thank you for correcting that. I do remember she was with Anton in San Francisco. I had presumed it was here, but yes, thank you for clarifying that.
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly where, but he had supposedly warned her. Some people thought it was a threat. I don't know. He certainly wouldn't own it. But the important thing I was getting at here is that, yes, Jane Mansfield was involved with Anton LaVey, was a high priestess, and, Sammy Davis Jr. was a part of the gang as well. But
and she ran for president.
I wasn't aware of that, but
she did. She ran for president.
What's important is that von Karman had a connection to Satanism that is very appreciated, understated, and I was going to ask you if you read anything in the documents in the Presidio about von Karman himself.
Well, I'll certainly look through my slush pile. There's plenty that I don't even consciously remember, or plenty that I've never read that I smuggled out in terms of notations. Much of the notations I took were almost like sleepwalking or unconscious. I didn't have time to read much that I took notations on, so I did not consciously remember it. And I can dig through my own slush pile and recall things that I did not absorb at the time that I was taking the notes prior destruction of documents. But one of the things I can bring up is when we bring up the British connection, of course, with Aleister Crowley, it's important to remember that not only did the Americans develop rocketry, which was ultimately exploited by the Third Reich, improved upon to the point where the Americans looked on them as the master rocketeers, the Allies originally developed blitzkrieg tactics. One of the fathers of blitzkrieg tactics was a disciple of Aleister Crowley, and as a matter of fact, he was a practicing Satanist in blood magical rituals from 1907 to 1911, and that was Major General J.F.C. Fuller. Now, Major General J.F.C. Fuller is someone who everyone in military historical circles is intimately familiar with. What they don't realize is that this son of a bitch actually authored a book on the tarot deck with Aleister Crowley, and of course, he had to leave formal magical initiation publicly when basically they began to mobilize for war with the Reich, but he remained in contact with Crowley his entire life, and of course was responsible for making Winston Churchill Aleister Crowley's chokin' bitch. So when we have, for instance, people in Britain who write me on Facebook and talk about dreams of Aleister Crowley, and you really wonder, of course, about, the impact of the satanic influence on one of our own fellow hostesses right here at Revolution Radio, Christine Joanna Hart, in interviewing E.A. Cotting. All of this is because Aleister Crowley is a far greater figure to the British people than Winston Churchill. They will not acknowledge that publicly or consciously. He dominates their psyche far more than Winston Churchill does, because he was essentially the mind behind Winston Churchill, the man who manipulated Winston Churchill, the man who ran the war. And anybody who doesn't know that has no concept of what was going on in the Second World War. My Executrix producer, bless her heart, has found the name of the Chinese individual. It's Shen Juexian. His surname in the romanization is spelled T-S-I-E-N. Surname is presented first in the Chinese tradition. In America, they would refer to him as Sui Xian Xian. And Xian is, of course, a Chinese name that is one of the many common names in China. There's only about 100 surnames in all of China, even though there's over 1 billion people. He was born in 1911 in Shanghai. He studied under Theodore von Karman at Caltech and then studied at MIT. He worked on rockets at JPL, where he met other key figures in American rocketry, hopefully on a far more conventional level than the kind of sodomy that was going on so often. And he became an Air Force colonel during the McCarthy communist purges. Xian was unjustly accused of being a communist, and he was deported in 1955. So he was part of the Trail of the Silkworm. Peter told this to Laura Lee Solomon. I get it. Yeah, the Trail of Silkworm was much later, in which we had the other unfortunate Chinese scientist who, of course, was also forced to basically leave the United States because of all of the charges made against himself. He ultimately developed the Silkworm missile system in his vengeance against the racist Americans. One of the reasons the Americans are afraid of my ever going back to China, why they never buy me off, which would be very simple to do, is just give me millions of dollars and get me the hell out of this shithole. I honestly do not want to be here, and I'm quite adamant and open about that. But they don't want me going back because the last librarian who ruled China was Mao Zedong. Mao Zedong was an enormous threat to the world, and the last thing they want is another Mao on the scene, even though my politics would be directly antithetical to that of Chairman Mao. But that's American logic for you. At any rate, when it comes to all of these military and British connections, when we go back to the Mojave Desert, basically when L. Ron Hubbard showed up, wasn't too long after that Marjorie Cameron showed up on January 18th of 1946, if I remember correctly, and she was identified by Jack Parsons or L. Ron Hubbard as the Whore of Babylon. Now, personally, this was from what I understand, from what I learned from Aquino, this was manipulation of Jack Parsons on the part of Aleister Crowley. And they got involved, of course, in trying to beget the magical moonchild. And basically, Parsons was convinced that Marjorie Cameron had showed up pretty much in response to a summoning ritual. And but that brings us back to the desert and what went on there. I'm assuming that what went on between L. Ron and, or as people used to call L. Ron Hubbard, what went on between him and Jack Parsons took place prior to Marjorie showing up and adding a kind of female element to all this. But by the way, just so people know, the Agape Lodge, which was run by Jack Parsons, agape means love. It means love in the Portuguese, I believe, or the Greek language. So it was all about sex magic. And so when we talk about this, it's just part of the whole pattern of this kind of magical ritual. So we're going to hit the break in just a few moments. Peter Moon, take us there to the break by kind of winding all of this up as best as you can. And we'll carry on a little bit after the break, of course, but wind up what you can right now.
Okay, well, basically, because Jack was so passionate and because he was trying to get a result, and of course, Marjorie did show up after this, it was done, which the rituals continued on after with Hubbard present. All three of them were present, which would have consisted of heterosexual sex magic. But because Jack was so passionate and because Jack even identified his own homosexual component, and if you look at Jack, he certainly had a bisexual nature about him, which goes hand in hand with magicians, the Baphometic reference point. You know, Crowley called himself Baphomet, which is an androgynous god. It stands to reason that from a purely magical, quote unquote, scientific reference point, Jack would have indulged in this, and it would have been matter of fact. Hubbard, and if you read Hubbard's writings, he talks about his, I don't know if the word is disgust or revulsion with Jack Parsons. He talks about his own personal revulsion with Jack Parsons. And I don't know why he would say that. He would have to have a reason. Now, also, if you want to watch hostilities in a communal setting, and of course Ron had stolen Jack's girlfriend, Sarah Northrop, and so Jack had some resentment about this. So you know what can happen with people in
So we'll be right back, and we're going to talk more about the bookstore and the book itself, the Necronomicon. And so stay with us, and I'll wrap up soon after we're back. Thank you for your patience.
Radio at freedomslips.com, and we'll be right back after this message. Revolution Radio. The opinions expressed on this radio station, its programs, and its website by the hosts, guests, and call-in listeners or chatters are solely the opinions of the original source who expressed them. They do not necessarily represent the opinions of Revolution Radio and freedomslips.com, its staff, or affiliates. You're listening to Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
Okay, I want to remind everyone that Revolution Radio on freedomslips.com is the largest listener-supported station on the internet. The key word here is listener-supported. It is you, the listener, who keeps us on the air. It's well into June, and it's time to show up and help us pay our bills. It takes $2,600 a month to keep Revolution Radio on the air, so stop by our website at freedomslips.com and click on the support tab to view some of the many fine options we offer for you to support us. And in expression of that, please consider subscribing to the Freedom's Lips Radio archives at less than $5 a month, $4.95 monthly to be precise, and sign up at the bottom of the archives page. Also, we have the 2014 and 2015 archive DVDs. Check out the DVD sales page at www.freedomslips.com/season 2014 and get an entire year of your favorite show on DVD format delivered straight to your door with an entire year's worth of transmissions for the numeric designated year. Every guest, every caller, as close as your DVD player, simply select your favorite show from the 2014 or 2015 broadcast year from the drop-down list and click buy now to check it out with PayPal, and your favorite show on DVD will be en route for only $34.95. That's $39.95 outside of the continental United States. Just email Mike Ringley, the proprietor of Revolution Radio, at the following electronic address, nighthawk@freedomslips.com. Email him your PayPal receipt, your show choice or choices, and physical mailing address. These are physical objects. We'll need that, as well as, of course, a post office box if that's what you're using instead for anonymity. Now, if you buy 5 or more of these DVDs, you get a free 1-year pass to the freedomslips.com archives. I always recommend the 6-pack, which, of course, would be Critical Omissions and the Saturday Night Firing Lines for the transmission years of 2015, 2014, and 2013. Also, Mike Ringley waits until he gets enough of these orders to justify his trip down to the post office in Louisville, Kentucky. They will be justified instantaneously by a 6-pack order. Again, you would mail the Nighthawk your PayPal receipt, your 6-pack choice, and your physical mailing address or P.O. box to the following electronic address, nighthawk@freedomslips.com. And of course, you are more than welcome to buy my own digital versatile discs or DVDs. And of course, Mike Ringley or Revolution Radio, we do not have an automated download system. There's no ADS. Your email must be seen and responded to by an actual person, so you must perforce allow at least half a day, that's 12 hours a minimum, for that happy event to take place. My own DVD presentations are, of course, Satan's Crusaders, in which we speak of Moonchild. Much of what I learned about him, I actually spoke to an individual who claimed to be Moonchild. I do go into this within the DVD Satan's Crusaders, which was, of course, is a recording of a presentation that I delivered many years ago. I also have 2 versions of Roswell and the Rising Sun, and they're available as DVDs as well. All of these DVDs are $30 each. There's no charge for shipping, so long as we're shipping within the continental United States, and they're also available in downloadable format, unlike the Revolution Radio annual archives. And these downloadable format presentations are only $15 each, half the price of the DVDs in my account. Both formats are available at once for the same presentation at $40. See the new website as set up by our web mistress, Mona Lee McRae, at www.dddietrich.com. Once again, that's www.dddietrich.com. And PayPal to lsolomon1@rgv.rr.com. I will spell that for you. That's LSOLOMON, numeric 1, @RGV for Rio Grande Valley, RR for Roadrunner Service.com, or lsolomon1@rgv.rr.com. It's one of the few addresses I've ever seen with 2 dots in it. Anyhow, you need to specify your own email address where we can send you a downloadable link and your choice of presentation. And of course, if you're ordering a DVD, we'll need all the same physical mailing address statistics that would be presented to Mike Ringley. Now, of course, Mona Lee McRae, who manages our website, has her own website. She is, of course, our regular contributor contributor and Oregonian correspondent, stuck up there in the Pacific Northwest with Amanda Ute. And she regularly comes onto the firing lines of Critical Omissions. Her music is always top 10 on Reverb Nation's regional charts. Stop by her YouTube channel at The Mona Hawk and her website at www.monalee.com. That's spelled www.monalegh.com, where you can purchase some of her music. Of course, I'm kept on the air by a personal sponsor. That's Ben Estenius, and he's a man who guides the Tucson Murders True Crime Tours. The Tucson Murders True Crime Tours provides historic crime investigations into forgotten lost crimes in Tucson, Arizona. Small private tours hosted by a true crime researcher and enthusiast, and they'll take you to real historic crime locations related to these crimes in Tucson, relive these events, and hear the untold stories behind the stories. This season, see the Pied Piper at Tucson tour. Crimes that shocked the Southwest in the 1960s. These devastating crimes stained the city so deeply they may never be removed. For tour information, contact Ben Estenius by his website, thetucsonmurders.com. Remember that Tucson spelled Tucson, Tucson, or contact him via his cell phone, 1-520/323 3406. Once again, that's 1520-323-3406. And of course, we've got leather-shop.biz, which helps Revolution Radio itself stay on the air. Visit www.leather-shop.biz for your customized leatherwear, any style, any size, any color, any fetish. They love freedomslips.com. And your promotional code for a $250 discount on your order is my own lowercase initials in the current year's numeric designate, DD2016. Once again, that promotional code to get your $25 off any customized leatherwear or gear is lowercase DD2016. And this year of 2016, you can sign up for the Time Travel Webinar Experience with Andrew Bartzies, Douglas Dietrich, Peter Moon, and Laura Lee Solomon, 4 unique personalities offering their perspectives on time travel and magic and how these two dynamic subjects have intertwined in the past, what role they might play in the future. All of us as participants breaking new ground in the course of this 4+ hour event. Webinar is valued at $37, but you as the listener to this transmission can get it for $27. And as a bonus, you'll receive the introductory and first video of Peter Moon's new video series entitled Time Travel Theory Explained. So go ahead and visit www.galacticnewsnetwork.com for details. Once again, that's www.galacticnewsnetwork.com. And I do want to remind people, of course, that the Nighthawk himself has just graduated with a degree in horticulture, and sustainable gardening after an investment in 2 years of classes. He's looking for investors or some help so he can get these hoop houses up and get things moving for the community here. Also, he's got his teaching degree in this field, so he can do videos, etc., in certified organic gardening and start teaching a bit of self-reliance beyond the big box stores. And he's asking for investments or even loans so he can move forward with this. He's always been about self-reliance. It was the reason he started this station, to relearn the world on the old ways with less dependence on technology as a total way of life. And that brings us, of course, to the call for action for the lady Amanda Ute. She currently suffers a massive diaphragmatic hernia and is very dependent on the grid. She needs modern medicine to keep her alive. Her diaphragmatic hernia was incurred incident being forcibly boxed in by identical trucks and run off the road when driving as a family in a mass assassination attempt to take out both herself and her 2 children. And this was an attempt that was casual, said internal injury, that now condemns the Madame Amanda Ute to painful death unless Providence Insurance grants coverage of prophylactic surgery as recommended by her care team of no less than 10 medical doctors, and is being refused this treatment on-site Providence St. Vincent Medical Center as administered by the American Intelligence Compromised Catholic Insurance Corporation, denying herself the emergent medical surgery necessary to preempt her own passing in what can only be deemed an overt conspiracy to murder, as no less than 4 surgeons to be responsible for her surgery have all filed grievances to said effect. So we would like you to basically take some personal action on this by writing in protest. And you can Facebook message, send an FB dip mess, a direct instant private message, to Providence Health and Services Insurance Director of Social Marketing and Communications at Providence Health and Services, Mary Renouf. Mary Renouf's surname is spelled Renouf, and her Facebook address would be as follows: www.facebook.com/Mary Renouf. That would be spelled www.facebook.com/MaryRenouf. RENOUF, all lowercase, all one word. And no dots, no dashes, no hyphens after the www.facebook.com/. All that you have after that is Barry Renouf. You can call them on the following landline number, 1-206/979. 1620. Once again, that's 1206-979-1620. And also try and contact Colleen Wadden at the following electronic address with an email. Colleen, spelled COLLEEN, .Wadden, spelled WADDEN, @Providence.org, to demand coverage for Amanda Ute's preventive surgery so her children shall not be left motherless as father for the satanic state child exploitation machine, as currently conspired by the same diabolitrous cabal whom she sought to sponsor my struggles against. With that, of course, we want to bring up some historical information to balance out what Peter Moon said before we bring him back on the air. We were speaking, of course, of Jian Xuexian. In the United States, he'd be called Su Xianxian, and he is someone who used his knowledge to erect China's space program. China, of course, has since been to the moon. China's first satellite was launched in 1970. Today, it has several different types of launch vehicles, thanks to Xian's work. In fact, China sent its own astronauts up into space in 2003, where they were able to see the Great Wall of China from space, mind you, all you idiots out there who say you can't. This accomplishment has placed China in league with the United States and the Soviet Union / Russia as the third nation capable of launching people into space. Xian is still alive today, and he has given presentations about his work from time to time, though I doubt he will ever willingly speak of his time with all the sodomites butt effing each other out there in the desert. Hopefully he wasn't among them. If so, no doubt he's been psychologically scarred forever. That brings us, of course, back to our good friend Peter Moon to speak of all this darkness. And Peter, one of the things that is very important to all of this is the bookstore Magical Child, which originally was, of course, the Warlock Shop. Now, when it comes to the book itself and the egregore, which preserves the book and protects it, guards it, and keeps it a bestseller year after year after year for decades in a row, selling quiet as a bastard, in the sense that Jonathan Livingston Seagull and The Little Prince did for years. Only those have a positive influence on people's lives, whereas this one destroys them. You have, of course, the spells in there that definitively do not work. You had Coating here on Revolution Radio telling kids to use that. That's like telling kids to mix nitroglycerin and hydrogen peroxide together and make their own suicide vests so they can go out and blow up, football stadiums or biology labs in universities or some shit like that. That's basically what Coating is promoting on the occult level by basically appealing to people's greed, saying that all of his success in life has been based on this grimoire, which of course is Latin for grammar, that was developed by Peter Levinda, the anti-Nazi propagandist, a man who tries to push off all the sins of Satanism onto the global ideology of National Socialism, or National Socialism. Now, of course, one of the things that is spoken of in that book are the gate walking rituals. And of course, these gate walking rituals have resulted in horrible effects that are felt by people. These are effects that have resulted in possessions by these entities. And of course, these spells, when I have analyzed the book myself and taken a look at it, we've got one of them is about the gate of Ganzar, the gate of death, the gate of shadows, and the shells. Now, that's simply a literal interpretation for the Hebrew word klipoth. Klipoth are, of course, on the tree of death, or the tree of anti-life that is beneath the tree of life. And the klipoth are simply the Hebraic word for shells, meaning that they're empty. They are shadows of the tree of life. All that evil is simply a parasitical mockery or mimicry of that which is produced by the light of the divinity. It could not exist without that any more than a shadow can exist without a physical body to cast it. So when we're talking about these clipotic nature type of spells, then we are entering a realm in which we're making ourselves quite quite vulnerable. And many people have spoken of the dog-faced demons that they encountered. This was the inspiration for, of course, H.P. Lovecraft's work, The Hounds of Tindalos. Now, it reminds me, of course, of Robert Monroe. We were speaking of Robert Monroe's Institute the last time that we were on air, and we were speaking about his work with subliminal technologies. In his book, Journeys Out of the Body, he quotes an anonymous woman narrator, and Denning and Phillips also quote this same woman in the Levelin Practical Guide to Astral Projection. It's been so long since I've read either book, I might be conflating the two, but I do remember that the reports were in those books about being attacked during astral projection by demonic entities that resembled dogs. And these dog-like assailants were exclusively dwellers of the lower astral. One would be highly unlikely to find them in the upper astral realms of the planetary spheres. And many people I know of personally have been attacked by dog-like entities while out of body when they're not traveling in the astral realms, but merely through earthbound space. So the Hounds of Tindalos are essentially based on a very real phenomenon. And while you were, shall I say, exploring or investigating all that you have, what can you tell us to kind of round out your experiences with this and with the magical bookstore? People who were driven away from there by things that they saw that horrified them forever. Tell us about this.
Well, you went silent for a second there when you were asking me a question. But the one thing I want to say that earlier you said that was so important about a magical work being incomplete. In other words, and it was the aspirants' challenge to recognize it as basically a bunch of bullshit.
Yes.
And this is, the area of magic is replete with this. You will have all of these, all the stuff that arose after the era of John Dee and Edward Kelly, that arose in Central Europe, in Prague in particularly, the Jewish magic that all came out, the Goetia and all these lesser keys, greater keys of Solomon. They basically are missing the entirety of what they're there for. And they become fragmented, disjointed, and that's almost like, to engage in this stuff is almost the immediate demise of the magician.
Yes, it would be like attempting to activate a nuclear reactor with various components missing that are safety mechanisms. Exactly.
And you don't see, you go into the forest or you go into the trees and you miss the fact that it's a forest, and you get consumed.
Well, the whole reason for much of this is because of the age of the church and the Inquisition resulted in a need for magicians to make their works as incomplete as possible. They could get away with saying they were working on alchemy as opposed to magic. So long as they were pursuing alchemy in the name of the crown, they could potentially help the economy of Europe and the monarchies. When they were instead pursuing magic, that became a threat to the church, which wanted to monopolize such powers. So we have a situation in which their works were intentionally fragmentary, and people had to travel to get themselves initiated within these various hermetic orders in order to work the grimoires. So this was excusable in that situation. In the age of the Necronomicon as produced by Peter Levenda, there is no excuse for that. He was not being prosecuted. He was being funded by the United States military, directly by Michael Aquino's department.
This is another important point here. And when we go back to how Christ was defined in occultism as the rejected stone, meaning the rejected capstone, there are stories of them actually creating gold in that time period. So you would have an abundance of transmutation of gold, and this became a threat. You can also look as not just magic became a threat, but alchemy, successful alchemy became a threat, because all of a sudden, whatever power the church had didn't have power. People could start creating their own gold. So you have this force that is antithetical to life, which is you're describing is represented by this, as you describe it, the United States military is dedicated towards this rejection of the capstone, rejection of the consciousness of life itself. The capstone representing the highest aspect that life can attain, which is also symbolized by Christ. So yes, this is what you have, this Antichrist theme with and just to wrap up on I was able to find that exact quote from Hubbard's affirmations. He says, any distaste I may have for Jack Parsons originated in a psychic experiment. Such distaste is foolish. He is my friend and comrade in arms. Before the break, I was saying is that hostility is often under the surface when people sleep with each other's girlfriends. And then, so you had a case where Hubbard had taken Jack's girlfriend. Jack obviously resented Jack resented Hubbard for that. And he even expresses it in his own writings. So if he's doing magic from his own quote unquote scientific perspective, he's also trying to, get under the skin of Hubbard at the same time. And this explains the motivation, both from a magical sense and a revenge standpoint, subconscious revenge of getting back at Hubbard, and who he did use as his familiar in the Babylon working. Hubbard was a familiar because Jack didn't have a cat. So he picked Hubbard to be his familiar. So everything.
So Hubbard was his pussy.
Well, yeah, if you want to say that, but everything in Hubbard's life became subject to communicating what Parsons was there to accomplish. And what Parsons' bigger goal was to gate in Babylon and to reverse the tyranny. It was really not a satanic agenda in his heart of hearts. And if you read his Black Pilgrimage just before he died, he basically self-immolated. He knew that this would cost him his life to bring in this goddess. And at that point in Cameron's life, she said after Jack died, she gradually became to take on the ambience of Babylon. That's where she really began to believe she was Babylon.
Poor dear. Yeah. And her life there was nothing to envy. From what you understand of it, it was quite unhappy, was it not?
I wouldn't say it was unhappy at all. She was a very austere person, a very unique person, and she wouldn't have cared. She would do something like at a party, and this was, I think, in either Redondo Beach or Manhattan Beach where he lived. It was a party, and she came down completely naked with a feather in her ass. And she would just sit there like art and be there. She was indifferent to how humans would react. So she really didn't give a rat's ass about how people thought. Mm-hmm. And she was an artist's artist in this regard. So she looked at things very differently. Now, she would talk to me because I got to know her, and she talked like a regular person, and she would always talk about people's miscomprehensions of magic, people's miscomprehension of Crowley. And certainly she was a regular person. One of her best friends would talk to her about being grandmothers. Mm-hmm. So she had a very real side to her, but she also got a kick of going into the local shop and getting kicked out because they thought she was a witch. I think she kind of got a kick out of that. So she liked to pull people's chain a little bit, but
by the way, I want you on for a full show sometime in the near future. We'll schedule that with our Executrix producer, Laura Lee Solomon, because I do want to speak more of Marjorie Cameron. We are speaking of someone who was the mother of Moonchild. And the fact that you spoke to her personally was something that you'd never spoken of with myself before. You might have, but, I got a lot of other things that I pay attention to. But It's one of those things where, it totally escaped my mind after you brought it up. In terms of the bookstore itself, because I do want to wrap up with that, I'm going to spend the last half hour basically talking about some of the things I did promise to speak about, because I was asked by various people about the situation in Orlando and their fears about gun control. So I do need to address that as soon as possible. So I do want to ask you to wrap up for now the experiences in the bookstore. You had a psychic friend who was very hypersensitive. The wall of the herbs was one thing, but there apparently was a false wall that led into other rooms.
Yes. Tell they would have their workshops and whatnot. I never attended workshops, so this is a friend I call Ken Arthur in my books. But he was, I don't know what the hell he was doing in there, but he walked in there, and the gate, the door was open, or the bookcase that served as a door, and he saw this woman menstruating and screaming and just kind of, just, this was a very, I guess what you call unnatural situation. And, it kind of gave him more than he felt like stomaching. But this was the type of wild, uninhibited stuff that went down there.
Mm-hmm.
And
he never went back, I'm assuming?
It wasn't his type of place, really. This is a very, very interesting man. But it was just like.
But when you were there, it was kind of in shutdown mode, and it was just a bookstore. You were there.
I was there in the daytime. Yeah. I never was there. I don't think I was always there in the daytime. Practically, the latest I might have gone in might have been 7 o'clock, but I was never. There to attend anything.
Well, that room where that woman was menstruating in and screaming out of, that room was where Peter Levenda delivered a series of lectures. That was the presentation room, if I'm not mistaken.
That would have more than likely been it and been there. And yes, you can read write-ups of Peter Levenda was a very character who frequented it and was known as a intelligence agent.
Yes, and of course his master, he's just the bottom bitch for Aquino, and as is John B. Wells, who said he couldn't do any more interviews with myself because Richard Dolan told him not to, and Richard Dolan, of course, is a bottom bitch for Aquino, so John B. Wells is the bottom bitch of a bottom bitch. So, there goes some hierarchy for you.
What I want to say about Mr. Levenda is that he will stay, I do not know him, I've read some of his books, but he has been rather a staunch, staunchly saying that he's not a member of the OTO. There is a History Channel show that features James Wasserman, the head of the Tahuti Lodge of the OTO, who wrote a book called In the Center of the Fire. He was a very highly placed person in the OTO who stayed at Aquino's house during the court case, which, he helped. They both helped get the current OTO its recognition from the United States government. But anyway, Wasserman is featured on this, and you can even see it on YouTube, of the History Channel showing the Ordo Templi Orientis, and they're doing a ritual in I think it's an attic in Manhattan, and they're doing this ritual, and Peter Levenda's there in a ritual. It's him. And, why is he in an OTO ritual if he's not a member of the OTO? It's just like, wow. Why? How do you do this? It's like saying you're not a Nazi and then you're goose-stepping wearing a swastika. Maybe you don't have to be in the OTO to do a ritual, I guess, but...
believe me, I could go into analogies that are very similar to that. It's amazing what people claim and what they do, and the obvious, the bald, just the sheer audacity with which people lie is incredible to me. But they know one thing: they know the American population is incredibly stupid, and they will literally believe anything you say. It is hardwired into our brain to believe anything that anyone says. People don't understand this, and that is all part of evolution, because we need to believe when someone tells us, oh, there's a tiger coming, climb into a tree. And so this got hardwired into our brains. With the Americans, and the Americans alone, I see this nowhere else in the world. It has reached a pathological inversion because this is a satanic anti-culture that's run by their military-industrial complex. And with the Americans, you have the fact that they will believe anything their government tells them, no matter how much they try and tell you they don't believe anything and how skeptical they are. But the only people they ever attack are the people who are saying what the government doesn't say. And so when I get up there and I will tell people that, hey, you know, the U.S. military lost the war, they never let you know that. And they just automatically, of course, disbelieve that. They go into a denial mode. And then when the U.S. military comes out and says, yeah, we won the war, we dropped the atomic bomb, they never ask, of course, why the atomic bomb's never been dropped again anywhere else to win in Afghanistan or Iraq or anywhere else, because obviously it didn't do shit in the Second World War, in the big one. So it's never been used again. So you get this whole thing where they will accept anything the government tells them while trying to promote how cynical they are and how they naysay everything. But they only naysay what people say that denies what the government is saying. They are the most manipulated people on earth, and it all goes back to their own fault because this is the way they want it. They want it that way. And so it definitely falls back into that. But
this is a perfect segue, Douglas, to go into Orlando. Yes. This was a lot of fun. I'll be happy to revisit this stuff when you're ready. So why don't you take us to Orlando? I'll sit back. I'll say goodnight, and I'll listen to what you have to say for the rest of the night.
Well, that's much appreciated, but I want your take on Orlando first. Segue us there and tell us what your impression is of what exactly is going on there.
Well, when you talk about it, I want you to quote our friend John Miranda, who has been meticulously going over it. It is obviously the fact that it was a gay club has a lot to do with it, but I can't go into that. I don't have enough time why they would select gays. But, you know, start quoting our friend John Miranda, because he's been meticulously, if you've been noticing his posts on Facebook, has been bird dogging this, you know, fake character, you know, the guy in the Red Sox who's being carted away. He gets up and walks away for the video.
There's been a lot of suspicion about many of these mass shootings, and I'll happily bring on John Miranda rather than quote him. I'll just happily bring him on himself to analyze any inconsistencies there. Mostly what I will address will be what everyone's fear of is a resultant this, which is potential further restrictions on firearms and on gun control. One of the things that I do need to bring up is, of course, the reason that the gay club was targeted was because we have the classic communist social engineering of thesis, antithesis, synthesis. And what had happened just before the Orlando shooting was the entire nation was mobilized in mourning of Muhammad Ali. Now, Muhammad Ali was born in Louisville, Kentucky. He was named after a very famous anti-slavery figure, Cassius Clay, I believe was somehow factored into Muhammad Ali's original name before he converted to Islam. Henry Clay, thank you, dear lady, my Executrix producer. No, Peter Moon brought that up. So thank you. Now, obviously, the Clays were very involved with the abolitionist movement, apparently as a kind of underground railroad dynasty, because I do remember Cassius Clay was a name that was affiliated as well with, I believe, Kentucky and abolitionism. But in terms of Muhammad Ali, we have someone who was, of course, a practicing black Muslim, and when he passed in the state, of course, where Mike Ringley lives, the proprietor of Revolution Radio is in the same state and the same city where Muhammad Ali was born and where his funeral procession was held. They made it very political, of course. Everyone was brought there who they thought would matter in a rainbow coalition sense. Mike Tyson was brought into the game. They had a Native American speak at the funeral. They had a Jewish rabbi speak at the funeral. At this point, we're getting absolutely ridiculous. This had none of these people had anything to do in particular with the life of Muhammad Ali. But all of this was being done on a national level to try and create a sense of unity behind the Muslim next door as the good guy and a constructive citizen. And of course, at that point, what people were really concerned with was the increasing influence of the gay lobby. This was the month to be aware of it because this is, of course, Alternative Lifestyles Awareness Month. This is the month of June. Now, as soon as we tucked Muhammad Ali safely into his grave, then a gay club is targeted, and suddenly people people were concerned with the commemoration of targeted homosexuals, and of course the vilification of the Islamic community. Ties with ISIS were brought up, and of course ISIS is actually an American mercenary corporation headquartered in Huachuca, Arizona, and it definitely is this situation of incredible irony, and maybe because nobody was buying into the show that was being put on concerning the Pulse nightclub and the mass murder that took place there, or people weren't buying various elements of it, they began to bring up the gator at Disneyland. Of course, I get from Laura Lee Solomon, Fort Huachuca, Sierra Vista, Arizona. Thank you, dear lady. And in terms of ISIS's headquarters, ISIS is, of course, traded on the stock market. You can buy and sell shares in it. One of its biggest shareholders is, of course, John McCain, and who is, of course, a politician in Arizona, I believe the senator they're from. And so we have that whole situation involving that. Now, what people are concerned with is this going to be another excuse to take guns away? Of course, I'm here to tell you that it is all part of an element of keeping you all busy with being afraid of that, but the guns are never going to be taken away. Just to give you the punchline, of course, we're going to have to worry about ammunition. Ammunition is something else entirely, and how the government handles that is the government simply buys up all the ammunition. Now, people, of course, get very paranoid about this, and they say, why is the government buying up all this ammunition? And, are they going to mobilize every government worker? Well, your average government worker makes Fatty Arbuckle and Jackie Gleason look like Jack LaLanne. Okay, your average government worker is a type 2 diabetic who is 200 pounds overweight and can barely move. You can give them a firearm and they can shoot from their motorized wheelchair at a fairly limited range of targets, but these are not people who can be successfully deployed against yourself if they were to mobilize every single government worker within the American empire. It's a no-go. The most they can do is buy all this ammunition, not because they're necessarily preparing for the zombie apocalypse, but rather they're just denying you its use. That is their form of gun control. That's as far as they can go. Now, a lovely lady, fellow librarian, a lady by the name of the Madame Tiffany Clark Grove, had written me on Facebook. She said, I have followed the false flag operations. We're certainly playing the game of distraction and fear-mongering in order for those in control to be asked, begged, but to help us foolish Americans by another blatant misallocation of power and reduction in our sovereign rights. It's just what Noam Chomsky warned us of in his book, Manufacturing Consent, and it's a textbook operation. Now, it's important to emphasize, of course, that Noam Chomsky is a bourgeois, Ashkenazi Jewish, anarcho-syndicalist, libertarian socialist, which means he's politically insane. He's an upper middle class, spoiled brat who decided he was going to go communist. And so he is also the father of modern linguistics. Now, in his book, Manufacturing Consent, The Political Economy of Mass Media, he outlines, along with Professor Emeritus of Finance at the Horton School of Business of the University of Pennsylvania, I believe, Edward S. Herman, who's now about 91 years old, the fact that we have these kind of mobilizing false flag operations. Now, of course, the lady, Tiffany Clark Grove herself maintains that gun control is irrelevant. We, the people, could not possibly stand against the militarized police task forces and the advanced technologies they utilize. And she asked myself if she was wrong about that. And of course, I corrected her. Of course, she's wrong about that. She's dead wrong. People do not understand that the police are a fly speck of the American population. The police have no capability of holding back the tide. Basically, in terms of power projection ratios, the forces of the entire state of the American empire could be overwhelmed by the American public in a proverbial heartbeat, more easily here, as a matter of fact, than anywhere else on earth. And that is the hard reality. That is motivation enough in and of itself for the chronic continuity of these diversionary attacks, which, of course, the lady Tiffany Clark Grove so astutely observes. Now, the United States, of course, is the only nation in the world that allows its citizens the right to bear arms, aside from the nation state which it aped and monkeyed and mimicked itself on, which was the Swiss Confederation, after which it modeled itself, which is a militia nation. It's important to remember, here's the primary difference. In Switzerland, there is no such thing as a right to bear arms. In Switzerland, bearing arms is mandatory. So everyone is drafted. In the United States, of course, they do not have a draft because what they've had from the beginning is the arming of their population in the largest army in the world. The largest armed force in the world is the American public. In terms of, even if we were to factor out the underworld empire of military-level armed criminal gangs and ethnic mafia networks, you've got 14 million law-abiding American sporting game hunters alone that constitute the world's largest army. Now, forget the Constitution, because the whole constitutional thing about this was meant for a frontier territory state. Wasn't meant to protect you from the state. It was meant to have you kill the native population. So everyone was encouraged to bear guns to kill the native population so there would be more land for the white slave-owning sons of bitches you call your founding fathers to grab and steal from the native population. So you were given guns so that you could go out there and kill for them. Now, the result was, of course, that you are uninvadable. Now, during the Second World War, the average American hunting rifle had comparable firepower to German, Italian, and Japanese military assault weapons. All the assault weapons of the Axis were of no more firepower per individual man-at-arms than that carried by an American hunter. Now, because gun ownership and proficient marksmanship due to bagging game was so prevalent throughout the United States, Japan did not invade the West Coast after bombing up Pearl Harbor, which destroyed nearly all the United States Navy cruisers in the Pacific Ocean. Even though there was no substantial American naval defense to stop the Japanese from attacking the mainland of the United States, the invasion did not occur because of the intelligence knowledge that Tokyo had that heavy losses would be estimated due to such high levels of gun ownership in America. As for the armed forces of the United States, qualitatively and quantitatively, they took care of them with the Battle of Los Angeles, simply by hovering the dirigibles over Los Angeles and fooling the Americans into assuming they were dropping biological weapons, aerosolized smallpox. They got the American army to kill itself by injecting smallpox vaccinations that had never been approved by the Food and Drug Administration. And the end result was they killed off entire divisions, or certainly eliminated them from use on the front, and prolonged the war by half a decade. Excuse me, not smallpox. It was yellow fever. Thank you, dear lady. That was my Executrix producer. And yes, it was Yellow Jack that was being that the Americans, of course, knew the Japanese had enormous reserves of, and they felt that they had aerosolized. Now, in reality, had the Japanese carried that much liquid to aerosolize in their dirigibles never would have made it across the Pacific. The dirigibles were empty, so they could make it home across the Pacific after simply hovering. But that was enough to make the army destroy itself. That's what prolonged the war. And of course, an invasion has never been intended by the Axis of the United States for all the reasons I've just articulated. Now, it's very important to remember the reason that you all have your guns is because we are still at a time when your United States Armed Forces, which lost the Second World War, as well as your police and your sheriffs, are going to be incontestably unable to protect you during any national emergency. This was exhibited during Katrina, and most particularly when that hit the largest port in the world. It's very important to remember it never gets that building, but New Orleans is the largest port on Earth. It's so large that Stanley Weinbaum, the author of The Black Flame, in his science fiction novel that he produced before he was assassinated, he portrayed New Orleans as the capital of planet Earth. All of the oil from the world comes in through New Orleans for all intents and purposes. That is coming from Venezuela in particular, obviously, right across the Caribbean. But it also comes there in good part from Nigeria, from many other places in Asia, etc. All of it, in the majority, goes through New Orleans, where it's distributed by pipelines to the rest of America. It is certainly the energy capital of the world. It's not hard to understand why somebody thought of it as the administrative capital of the world, since it's so responsible as a hub and a center point for energy distribution. Now, New Orleans, of course, during Katrina, suffered the greatest mass desertion in history. 20,000 United States sailors deserted rather than face combat in Iraq, where many of them were being sent to basically deactivate bombs in the field. Since they didn't want to sacrifice their troops and their National Guard, they sent in sailors off of ships to deactivate or dismantle or disarm improvised explosive devices. This was killing hundreds and hundreds of sailors at the least, if not thousands. And so the sailors deserted in the thousands, and we had 20,000 of them desert during the Katrina disaster. So that's what your military is going to do during any national emergency. They're not going to be there rounding you up to camps. They're going to desert. So you don't need to worry about the military coming to do anything to you, round up your guns, put you in a camp. Any of that is just ridiculous. Now, keep in mind, nowadays, of course, American marksmanship has gone way downhill other than with hunters. And you've got 14 million of them. It's the world's largest army. You just take a handful of states and you add up the deer license sales. And there's about 600,000 seasonally in the state of Wisconsin. 600,000. Wisconsin's hunters are the 8th largest army in the world. That's more men in arms than in Iran. You've got more than France and Germany combined, you idiots. There's no way your government could take you on. And these are men and women that deploy to the woods of a single American state in Wisconsin. And the last season that I checked in terms of hunting, there wasn't a single fatality. Certainly none that made the news. That means that their marksmanship, for all intents and purposes, is excellent. Their standards of safety are beyond comparison. They are more effective than most deployed armies of draft A's. Now, and that pales in comparison with the 750,000 who hunt in the woods of Pennsylvania, Michigan, 700,000 hunters, toss in 250,000 hunters in West Virginia. That literally establishes the fact that the hunters of those 4 states alone would comprise the largest army on planet Earth. You add in the total number of hunters in 46 other states, and it's millions more. You have no danger. You don't need an army. Get rid of your goddamn army. You don't need Satan's military-industrial complex over yourself. Dismantle the army. No one will ever invade. This is your national security. And so you're worried, then that's why all enemies, foreign and domestic, want to disarm you, right? Well, there's no way your own government can disarm you. There's no way an army of 2 million, if you mobilize the entire Communist Chinese army to invade, if you could ever get a logistical tail that long, it would face 50 million armed citizens. So your own U.S. government, which has far less than the Communist Chinese army, could never face up to that. So all they can do is run out diversionary attacks, get you afraid of gun control, keep everybody running around like a chicken with their head cut off and worried that their guns will be taken. They can never take your guns. Now, what happened at the Pulse shooting, whether it happened or not, that was the 133rd mass shooting of 2016. Of 2016! I mean, how far are we into 2016? That's the 133rd mass shooting. That's how many guns there are. There's no way that you can control that. You cannot get any way to control that. To put this into perspective for you, you've got like maybe about 107 gun deaths per 1 million people in the United States. That's 2011. That's the last year that we have for such numbers that I checked, maybe, or 2013, if I remember, a while back, about 3 to 6 years ago. Now, the United Kingdom, the last time they took a survey was about 2011, and they had about 146 gun deaths per 1 million people. So their amount is far lower because, of course, they have total gun control. But you see, they've always had it. So if we were trying to get to UK levels, we'd have to reduce gun deaths by 98%. Now, that would be impossible because functionally everybody in America, for all intents and purposes, owns a gun. Now, to show you how mind-blowing this statistic is, America has about 4.4% of the world's population. When you count all of its illegal immigrants, we've got 5% of the world's population. We have half of civilian-owned guns in the world. Half of the civilian-owned guns in the world are with less than 5% of the U.S. of the world's population. And like I said, that's counting in illegal immigrants who are not legally allowed to own guns, theoretically, even though many of them have them. So the rest of many law-abiding citizens, of course, like in New York City or Washington, D.C., don't own guns at all. But there is no way they can take your guns away. The most they can do is buy up all the ammunition in big sweeps to prevent you from getting ammunition. And, of course, this is because there's no way they can pass legislation to take away your guns. It is simply impossible. There's too much of a lobby on the part of elements for gun interests to ever have your guns taken away. Much of this, of course, thanks to your hunters, who also preserve much of the environment, who are a very established part of your conservation. So what we have to do is recognize the importance of hunting, because these hunters are going to be supplying the food when your government ultimately collapses. So again, to wrap up the show, dismantle your military completely. You will never face a foreign invasion. The military, of course, is entirely redundant. It does nothing but damage to yourself and the world, and ultimately intends the destruction of your universe, quite literally, based on their devotion to Satanism. They are a cult. Your military is a cult as much as L. Ron Hubbard's Scientology was a cult. Less than 1% of your population is in the military, as I've mentioned many times before, inclusive of the entire Department of Defense, inclusive, of course, of the National Guard, the reserves, all that 100,000 bureaucrats with the DOD, all of your National Guard, your reserves, all your branches of services, and the Coast Guard put together are less than 1% of your effing population, and yet they get over 50% of your income. And what do they do with this? They pursue black projects based on a satanic agenda that has degenerated now into an anti-godly agenda, an extrastellar, extra-cosmic agenda of the chaos gods worshipped by Aquino. As this cult became less than 1% of the population because of the elimination of the draft, they became a cult that needed a religion to produce cohesion. That religion is Satanism taken to anti-divinity status. Satanism that has gone beneath Satanism into that of the worship of the chaos gods of Cthulhu, of Yog-Sothoth. And I can say these names because they are in the barbaric tongue without calling forth these entities, because I am speaking in the human tongue. In order to truly call upon these entities, it requires non-human vocal cords, or an enormous amount of ritual abounding and surrounding oneself in order to bring their presence to you. That's what makes the Necronomicon so dangerous. You have children doing this now. That is their weapon against you. They are your enemy. Your military is not just your enemy, it's the enemy of all humanity and of God, the Creator, the divinity himself. So all of you must mobilize against this enemy and lobby to dismantle your military. And that is what you need to worry about, instead of them taking your guns away. Your military does not have the power to do that. That's why they call upon the anti-gods to destroy your universe instead. They cannot disarm you. They don't have the numbers. They don't have the motivation. They don't even have the physical capability as human bodies, because most of the people in your military are trained, literally trained, to take in French fries and beer and donuts and coffee, while other armies are drinking swamp water and marching for miles on end to reach that swamp water in the first place. Your military doesn't do any of that. They're not even physically fit to get out of their motorized wheelchairs. They're fit for shopping at Target, and that's about it. If you don't know this, you haven't been in the military. The only people of any physical capabilities are sportsmen and special forces. And everybody else in the military is either a sunken-chested, mustachioed, four-eyed dolt, or you've got somebody who's a fat slob. So you've got that situation. They're not even physically capable.